Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
And we are dedicating this podcast to anyone who is caring for somebody else, whether it's a loved one, a spouse, somebody in your family. The emotions run high. There's a lot going on there, a lot to process, your emotions, their emotions. How do you do that? Well, step one, you call upon somebody that can help you, that has the experience and has helped others with that. Specifically, a coach that deals with caregiving. I found her. She's fantastic. Marika Humphreys is our professional of the year. She's back with us. Welcome. How are you?
I am doing well. As we just talked about, had a really nice weekend and also went through my cluttered inbox and feeling pretty good on this Monday.
It's like you purged email.
I did.
Right?
It's so lightening to do that. So yes, if you've got a cluttered whatever drawer or something, I encourage you to go clean it out. You will feel lighter.
Well, you made room, I believe, you made space for processing emotion if you ever need to. And a lot of us have, when somebody says, I've had it up to here, well, you probably have, because there's no more space for you to work with, in your emotional space within you. There's a lot when you're a caregiver. There are so many emotions that you have to deal with on a minute by minute basis.
Yeah. And one of the, we've talked a lot on the show about like the emotions that we feel as the caregiver, and there are a ton, and you do need space for that. I mean, that is why, this is why I do what I do, because often as caregivers, we don't make room and even validate our own emotions. But there's also the emotions we feel when our loved one has emotions. So sometimes those emotions are anger or frustration or just grumpiness, irritability, all the emotions that they're going through. As a caregiver, we experience as well. And I think it can be really challenging to feel love and compassion, which I think is how most of us would like to show up for our loved one when they're feeling whatever emotion, when they're expressing, we should say, whatever emotion they're going through, and yet still not kind of get wrapped up in that emotion, or get to the point where you're like so burnt out and exhausted, or just so sort of exacerbated that you can't even deal with it either. You just want to like kind of say, I can't deal with this right now, and sort of want to leave. I think there is a middle ground there, and there is a way to show up and have love and compassion without falling into the trap of sort of getting sucked into their emotion. So that's what I'd like to talk about today, because it's doable, but it's just not something I think we often think about a whole lot.
Let's, if we may, focus on guilt. So guilt comes in and just give a situation where somebody you're caring for is dealing with something. You can't do anything about it. You can just help along the way, listen to them, but there comes to a point, there's only so much you can do. I don't mean that in a negative way. That's the reality of it. But then you feel guilt. So you're dealing with that emotion. And sometimes they pick up on it. They might not even know that you're dealing with guilt, but they can sense, that you might be frustrated. But
Yeah.
Because of guilt. How do you process that one?
Yeah. So let's talk about first, like, let's say, again, the guilt comes from feeling like we should do more, or should be more, or should be able to help better, or somehow we're lacking in something. That's when we feel guilty. Or we responded, like I think for a lot of caregivers, sometimes we get caught up and we respond in a way that's maybe irritable or short-tempered, or we lose our temper with them, and then we feel guilty. So our behavior, sometimes we feel like we're not measuring up, or or something. That's when I think a lot of times we feel guilty or we're not enough, right, to help them. And what I'd like to do is, one of the things I always tell people is like emotions, we all are responsible for our own emotions. That is not what we're taught as children. We are taught that we are responsible for other people's emotions. We are taught as young children, don't make Sally cry. By being mean, you'll make them cry. Or, we're taught that what our behavior will cause another's emotions. And while that is true in that our behavior affects others, how a person feels is determined by their reaction to what we do, right? Which is why you can say the same thing to two different people, and one person may take it super personally and get super offended, and the other person won't even have a second thought, and like it won't affect them at all. Because our emotions come from how we interpret or how we think about what someone says or does or the situations in our life. So ultimately, we can't make someone feel anything, good or bad, right? And so I start with that because it's important to recognize that we each have our own emotions, and just as a caregiver, we're responsible for managing or learning to understand and validate the feelings we're having. But it's also important to recognize that the person you're caring for is also responsible for, and I'm going to use that word even though that might seem kind of like a lot, but they're responsible for their emotions as well. And if you can just start with that separation, I think it will help. As a caregiver, it's going to help you realize that you may be able to support them when they're feeling angry or vulnerable or frustrated or sad or any number of experiences that a person goes through when they've lost some major part of their health, or they're struggling, or they're facing disease. Incredible emotions come up for them, right? We can only imagine. I think one of the biggest things that people facing either an illness or disability from like a stroke, for example, face is loss of autonomy, loss of independence, vulnerability. All of those things are going to they're going to have emotional responses to. And so just recognizing there's a separation there. We have the emotions we feel, and then they have the emotions they feel. And we're each responsible for our own emotions because it comes by how we interpret the world and how we see things. And there are some people out there who probably are caring for people who are incredibly resilient and strong and have a super positive outlook. And then there are other people who are caring for somebody who's bitter and angry and frustrated and just grumpy all the time because they're so frustrated with, the fact that what they've lost maybe in their health journey. So those emotions that they experience are their own. And what we can do, I think, is first recognizing that. And then the second thing is, just like it's important to validate our own experience as a caregiver, the guilt we feel, the frustration we may feel, like those are valid feelings. We can also provide that validation for another person. And I think what we tend to do is either want to fix it for them, like that was a lot of times my experience, and I think a lot of people, especially probably it comes up, I think, a lot with disease, where you see, in my case, my husband was battling cancer, and there were so many things he went through, and I saw his emotional pain, his frustration, his anger, and my heart broke for him, of course. Wow. And that caused me to want to try and fix it. I literally felt like that was my job. Like, I'm his spouse, I should fix it for him. I think what's a really similar comparison is our children too. I think we also feel like we need to make sure our children don't experience any pain because that's our job as their parent. And we all quickly realize that we can't do that. That's where our powers, have limits. And the same is true with the loved ones that we're caring for. We have limits on our ability to make things better for them. But we can accept that we have limits, then you can start to shift to thinking, but how can I support them? And all of us, like we've talked about before here, we all want to just feel validated and heard. That's such an important part, I think, of all of our human experiences. We want to just know that somebody understands us, hears us, recognizes us, that we're in pain. So I've kind of got a very long-winded, sort of answer to your question about like when you have the guilt, but it starts with just seeing that their emotions are separate and their own, and that's okay. And we can be there to just validate it. We don't need to either fix it for them or let them sort of suffer on their own, maybe if we are burnt out and exhausted.
So let's take this a layer potentially more challenging, depending on how you look at it. What about if you're caring for somebody that has dementia and then they have emotion because they're frustrated, they don't know what's going on, you're upset, your emotions are running high, you can't help them, they might not even know where they are, whatever it might be. How do you handle that?
Yeah. I first will say that I know I have not had that experience personally, but many, many people do. And I think there is, I think kind of going back to how do you separate, a lot of times we get wrapped up in their emotions, one way or the other, either wanting to fix it or feeling frustrated with their behavior and their emotions. And so going back to that idea that we are each separate and we're having our own emotional experience based on our own view of the world. Or in the case of dementia, and I can think of some other examples as well, probably somewhat similar, I think it can be really helpful to recognize where the disease is and where your loved one is. And especially in cases where disease takes over, that can, I think, help to, a lot of times we want to understand, right? And with dementia, like, again, the frustration of that individual, like, I can only imagine, what they're experiencing, and losing the ability to trust your own mind has got to be a frightening experience, very frightening. Not remembering where you were the day before, or however it shows up. So being able to have some compassion for how that must feel for them, and then how it comes out. Maybe it comes out as anger or frustration or grumping. It could come out in a bunch of different ways. But
Sure.
seeing that a lot of that's just the disease, it's not the person. And the
How do
disease,
you, okay, so let's look at that.
yeah,
The disease is doing this to them.
yeah,
You're frustrated because you can't help them. Of course,
yeah,
they're frustrated. They maybe not able to trust everybody, and
yeah,
they're in a tornado right now.
yeah.
Is it where you have to look at it as the caregiver that this is the disease, it's not them, and try and separate your emotions because of that?
Yes. And what helped me, and I think can work, some variation of this, is reminding myself I don't have to fix this. They don't need me to fix this. And when I say fix this, what I'm talking about is their emotion, right? However that's being expressed. And this is the disease, and I don't have to fix it. You may not even have to address it in any way, potentially. And just by reminding that, because when we think we need to do so, when we think of emotions as a problem that need to be fixed, we're going to get into fix it mode. And when we're in fix it mode, we're trying to fix something that has no fix. There's no fix to an emotion. Sometimes, mostly, emotions just need to be expressed. And whether a person is, expressing them from like kind of the disease is driving that, or they're just having, the normal human experiences of a person facing a health condition, it's not something that has to be fixed. So that may be another useful thought. And it truly is about getting in your own head and realizing emotions aren't a problem that I need to fix. Sometimes they just need to be. Like this person may just need to express it. And if I don't need to fix it, then what can I do? And a lot of times the answer is just be there. In coaching, we have a term called holding space. And I think it's probably used in therapy and other avenues as well. But I love it because it's the idea that we just create a safe space for someone to express themselves without giving them any solutions, without telling them what they need to do, without trying to change them, without trying to offer fixes. We just let them express themselves. And that's called holding space. And that's, therapists do that, coaches do that. And I think a caregiver, when you can drop into that role of my job is just to hold space in this moment with love. And I always like to add with love because it just changes how you think when you add with love. Even no matter what you're feeling about the big person you're caring for at the moment, you may be, up to your wit's end, but you do love them. And just dropping into like, I don't have to fix this. I can just listen and love them. That is how we get out of that kind of tied to their emotion.
All of this is so challenging.
Yes.
It
Yes,
really is. It's
yeah.
and I'm trying to make space to understand, but and I have friends that are going through it and trying to help them through it.
I want to share a story, Steve, because this is where it struck home for me, like in a way that was just so powerful. And I've told this story many times because it was so powerful, but I know that when I tell it right now, it's just it's gonna just bring chills. So my husband battled cancer and he ultimately passed away from cancer, but there was a period of time where his health was actually doing pretty well. And we were getting ready to go on a trip. We'd already sent our 10-year-old, I don't remember how old she was at the time. But anyway, we sent our child off to the grandparents and everything was fine. We had eaten dinner. We were watching a TV show. It was kind of our routine. And he got up and left the room. And I went in and found him like kind of laying on our bed with his hand on his chest and in pain. And I was like, super worried, super scared. It's like, I don't know, 8 o'clock at night, and I start kind of freaking out like, oh my God, what should I do? And in the cancer journey, it's not, pains and all these things that you have no idea what's causing them. That's not unfamiliar, but it's scary every single time. And you always go through this, oh my God, do we rush to the emergency room? Do I call 911? Like you start kind of mentally going through, what do I do? And how do I respond? And how do I fix this? And, all the what ifs or what should I's. And so that was kind of my energy was just like freak out. Oh my God, what do I do? So I start Googling things. And he said, Marika, just love me. And I sat down next to him on the bed and I held his hand. And I remember thinking, I just want to exude love, like hold his hand and just however you do that. I don't know, but I didn't say anything. I just held his hand and tried to like radiate love. And that is what he wanted from me. I imagine was scared. He didn't know either. He obviously probably didn't feel like it was enough to like call 911. I think he would have said that, he would have told me, but he just wanted comfort and love. Like he didn't need me to fix this problem for him. This emotion.
You know what he wanted? He wanted you to hold space for him, right? Seriously.
Yes.
Seriously.
Yeah.
That's what it was.
Yes. And that was kind of my aha moment to where all the trying to comfort and say nice things and like
and be super be super Marika.
And he didn't need any of that. He just needed me to love him.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, and we so underestimate the power of love, and because it doesn't even require you to speak. Like, it literally doesn't. Sometimes it just needs being in the room, holding their hand, a touch, and just feeling love. You need to feel it. If you're sitting there in their side, scared out of your mind, they're not gonna feel love, right? You have to feel love. So that's why telling yourself what your job is. Your job isn't to fix. They don't need you to even comfort them necessarily, like say comforting things, or you'll get through this, or you got this, or try and be a cheerleader. A lot of times they don't even want that. They just want to be heard and like feel not alone. I think is also, I
Yeah.
think that's what he also wanted. And I can imagine so much, even if how they're displaying their emotion. And I think this is something too, that it can be hard to see, because sometimes their emotion may be anger, maybe not something that's easy to approach. My husband also had many periods of just anger at what cancer was robbing from his body. And in those times, I also wanted to fix it for him, but I couldn't.
Mm.
So I think we can also love from afar too. I mean, if their emotion is something hard that's just, you don't even want to be in the room, and maybe you shouldn't be in the room, you can still love them from afar, knowing that emotion isn't a problem that has to be fixed. Emotion is an experience that has to be felt, really.
Mm.
And
Well,
sometimes it pass.
it goes back to the transfer of energy and people feeling what you feel. And like you
Yeah.
said, you don't have to be there, but like when somebody's going through a procedure or whatever, and they could be 1,000 miles away, and you say,
Yeah.
"Hey, I'm sending positive vibes. I'm sending prayers, whatever it is." That's what energy is, a vibration,
Yeah.
positive vibes. You're
Yeah.
sending that to them. And maybe in your husband's situation, you were doing everything out of love to make it better, fix it, change it, make him more comfortable. You did all of those things, and he probably felt your frustration as well,
Yes.
as anybody would. He's not even seeing it from you, but feeling it from you. And he just wanted to, I just want to feel love. Just give me the basics right now, honey. That's the basics. That's it. And we'll be
Yeah.
good. And I need that to get me over the speed bump of the pain that he was going through.
Yeah.
I'll be okay. Just a little, I need a little nudge. That's it.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, I do believe this with my heart and soul, that we feel others' energy. That emotion is energy, right? It expressed as energy. And whether we're speaking or not speaking, or saying or not, people feel that from them. We can tell when someone's in a bad mood. They don't have to say anything. We can see it by their body language and
sure.
what the energy coming off of them. And that works both ways. So in the case of caregiver and the person they're caring for, right, you're going to feel their emotion. So finding a way to have some sort of kind of like I want to almost say protection against it, because it can be really easy to let it affect you, and that's not helpful, because then
Right.
it will keep you, either it'll cause you to feel stressed or anxious, or and then they feel your anxiety and your stress, just like
Yes.
the scenario you just described.
You said the word I was just about to say, because you're going through, not you, but just we can go through
Yeah.
anxiety. Let's say you normally have anxiety. Now you have the caregiving situation where now you've amped it up, and now you're dealing with that. Plus you're trying to help, plus the meds and everything. Sometimes I'm guessing maybe sometimes the love, it's there, the love is there, but maybe the pure love maybe gets lost, because with everything else on top of it, all coming from a place of love. Thank you for sharing that today, because I think that is I feel it's a game changer. Wow.
I
Marika,
Yeah.
how do we find you? Somebody's, dealing with this. They have nowhere space.
Yeah.
What do
Yeah.
they do?
Yeah, well, actually, on my website, I do have a video that speaks to this exact situation.
Okay.
And I call it "How do you support your partner when they're in pain?" But what I really mean is sometimes that's physical pain, but after you get painkillers or comforting, whatever you can do, sometimes they're still just in pain that you can't fix, right? And that is just part of their condition or their disease or whatever. And it's emotional pain, both types of pain. I have a video on there, free video that you can that you can get on my website, which is coachmarika.com. So if this is something you're struggling with, which I think all caregivers do in some form, have to deal with this. And then reminding yourself, you don't have to do anything, you can just love. And that is the most powerful, truly is.
I don't even have any more words because that says it all right there. Seriously. So,
Yeah.
and I'm very honest and always transparent in anything I do. I will be sharing that later today with those who are caring for loved ones and are going through a lot. So I appreciate that. Thank you so much for being here today. Truly appreciate it, Marika.
You are welcome. Thanks, Steve.
All right. We'll talk soon. We'll be right back.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
Mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.